Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sue Harmon and I'm a librarian at the Manchester City Library in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us today for the second part of the Culturally Curious Art Series, Revolutionary Design, Modern Architecture in New England, presented by Jane O'Neill. I'm joined by librarians from your hometown. This program is made possible by the combined resources of the GMOS libraries. We're very excited to be able to offer educational programs to our patrons. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This is a webinar, so all attendees are muted and your videos are off. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, and the chat box is for, you can put questions in there, but if you want to chat with each other or use that box for reflection, we would appreciate that. Make sure your messages are going to everyone. Otherwise, it'll just be going to panelists here. And your responses really do help us. Let us know what types of programs you'd like to see in the future and sign up for your library's newsletter for upcoming programs and library news. Speaking of upcoming programs, on Wednesday, June 7th at 6:30 p.m., please join the Derry Public Library for Walking Through France. Gail Carey will talk about her journey on the Chemin de Saint-Jacques Trail. And on Saturday, June 17th, the Derry Public Library Comic-Con returns for a second year with a new name. It's now called the DPL FanCon and it has all of your nerdy needs.
So on Tuesday, May 30th at 6:30 p.m., we're having a New Hampshire Humanities program called Vanished Veterans, an illustrated introduction to New Hampshire Civil War monuments and memorials. A historian George Morrison will talk about the diverse selection of New Hampshire's commemorations and their stories, beginning with obelisks in the 1860s and continuing to remastered works of the 21st century.
And on Tuesday, June 13th at 6:30 at the Rogers Memorial Library, you can join a program to explore America with Augustinus and Ace to discover locations where Native Lithuanians came and made their new homes. Your presenter today is Jane O'Neill. Jane curates and delivers art appreciation programs to audiences throughout New England and beyond. Jane holds a master's in art history from Boston University and a master's in education from Harvard University. A New Hampshire native, she has worked at some of the state's most esteemed cultural institutions, including the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, where she served as executive director, and the Currier Museum of Art, where she held the role of senior educator. Jane has also taught at the college level for more than a decade, most recently at Southern New Hampshire University. For more information, visit her website at iamculturallycurious.com. And that is, with that, I will hand it over to Jane. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Sue, and to all the partnering libraries. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day today to learn a little bit more about modern architecture that's in our region. Whenever I'm competing with good weather like this, I'm especially appreciative that you're taking time out of your day and spending it with me. We are in for such a treat because these places that we'll look at tonight are places that you can get to really easily by car. I can save you some gas tonight, but I hope that this program inspires a few road trips in the months ahead. So we will be looking at 5 incredible properties. 3 of them are homes. And I was saying earlier this evening, it's really fun to look at houses because you can imagine how you might be able to live in them, or if you absolutely couldn't. 2 of them are libraries on academic campuses with varying degrees of public accessibility. So I wouldn't suggest just walking up and expecting you could get in. But the residences are now all open for public tours. So a very quick preamble. When we're thinking about anything revolutionary in New England, of course, we tend to associate that with the 18th century. We tend to think of architectural history in New England as the buildings that were built in the 1700s, something like John Adams' birthplace over here, a good old salt box colonial in Quincy, Massachusetts, or something like a federal style mansion over in Portsmouth at the Strawberry Bank Museum. We don't necessarily think of New England as being a hotbed of architectural revolution, but that's because we focus so much on that early history there. So today we will be seeing some really just incredible works that I think will really knock your socks off. So let me give you a chance to take in how we'll spend this next hour together. We're going to get started with Walter Gropius, turn our attention to, I'm sorry, actually it's Philip Johnson, and then Frank Lloyd Wright. Then we'll shift gears and start looking at libraries. First, Louis Kahn's library in Exeter, and then Maya Lin's library in Northampton at Smith College. And this visual over here corresponds to the Zimmerman House that Frank Lloyd Wright designed in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is my hometown. And it's a property that I know so well because I used to run the tour program there. This is his kind of updated take on a stained glass window. So these are just glass culls from Corning Glassware, colored glass here. And it's all illuminated by electric light. So you had to have very tiny hands to reach into those squares and change those light bulbs. There's always an issue when it comes to some of these innovations, right? So let's dive right in with Walter Gropius. We can see him here at the beginning and the end of his career. He was a German-born American architect. And he's really considered sort of the father of modernist architecture. So architecture was in his blood. He managed to survive World War I in Germany. And then after that, he followed in his own father's footsteps and sort of hung out his shingle to become an architect. But his path in this field was one that was incredibly groundbreaking because Walter Gropius was the founder of the school called the Bauhaus. He founded it in 1919 in Germany. And this is a building on the campus of the Bauhaus that he designed. So it gives us a little bit of a quick peek, a quick taste of his design aesthetic. This is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the building itself was designed in 1926. So this is what's called the international style. And you might be looking at it and thinking, Jan, I've seen so many buildings like this before. Essentially every industrial building in every city kind of looks like this, doesn't it? Very streamlined, pared down, no real architectural ornamentation here, but this was all an innovation at the time, and it did become the dominant style of the 20th century right up until the 1970s. So we see pared down color, mostly black, white, and gray. We see the use of prefabricated industrial materials and a heavy reliance on glass too. So the idea here is to just rely on something that looks very streamlined and something that looks sort of clean, maybe a little austere to our modern eyes, but at the time, something that looked incredibly modern and novel. So if you remember your World War II history, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis did not necessarily like anything that was associated with modernism. So when Hitler took power in Germany in 1933, Walter Gropius, our architect here, got out of town because Hitler shut down this school. And so Gropius ends up in the greater Boston area. Actually, he was hired to teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And here he was in America with all of this really sort of modern furniture. And there was a patron of the arts named Helen Storrow, the same Storrow of Storrow Drive. She had some land out in Lincoln, Massachusetts, and she donated 4 acres to Walter Gropius so that he could design his very own house here in America. And we are looking at the front of that house. This is the home that he designed for himself. It is roughly 2,300 square feet. It's 3 beds, 3 bathrooms, and it was completed in 1938. It's about 1 mile to Walden Pond, about 15 miles to Harvard Square, and really not since shots rang out in nearby Concord had anything so revolutionary happened in the greater Boston area. So we're going to switch our view here just a little bit. And this is really the front of the house as you would see it driving up the driveway. So this is kind of your first view if you're visiting. Now, the house follows all of these Bauhaus principles. It's a very simple form, essentially a cube with a flat roof and these what they called ribbon windows, this long stretch of connected windows. I love that term here because I always think of this spiral staircase as almost like a ribbon curlicue, terminating that ribbon of windows there. We have a heavy use of glass and industrial materials. Now, one of the wonderful things Gropius does with this house that is sited in the middle of historic Lincoln, Massachusetts, is that he gives these little nods to local architecture. He does a fieldstone foundation. There is actually vertical clapboard siding here. And even though we can't see it in this image, there's a brick chimney. So he feels like he's trying to integrate in some ways, but of course, something that looks like this sticks out like a sore thumb, and the neighbors did not necessarily like it. They referred to it as a chicken coop, and they were absolutely certain that with the first snowstorm, that flat roof was just going to collapse. Spoiler alert, it's still there. So let's imagine what it would be like to be Walter Gropius or the new owner of this house. What would it feel like to come home and to drive up this driveway? Well, one of the things that I really love about this house is that there is this projecting porch that almost feels like it is stretching out away from the house to come and meet you at the driveway to provide this wonderful sense of protection. And of course, this idea of a front porch is another kind of nod to New England traditions, but there's never been a front porch like this in New England prior to Gropius. So you have this covered walkway as you approach the house, and it's even protected by this screen of glass bricks over here as you get even closer. Notice that that spiral staircase that I mentioned before, it's just past the front door. It's not really the front entrance of the house. It's not really where you would go if you were visiting it for the first time. So once you step inside that front door right there, what do you see? Well, these are two views of the same entranceway. And if you have really good eyes, you might just be able to see the door handle. That is the front door right there. So you'd come into this kind of well-lit space, the continuation of those glass bricks. So it's all lit up and immediately modern. There's a modern sensibility here. The vertical clapboards from the exterior of the house have been continued on inside as well, kind of charming feature, as well as the black and white color scheme. So we even have these curtains. The curtain rod is embedded into the ceiling. You can draw those curtains to add a sense of intimacy or to sort of block out some of the cold air that might come in on a chilly New England winter day. There is a rug that is embedded into the floor. It's not going to be shifting around. And so there's all these kind of wonderful functional things that are happening right as you step into the house. As you come around the corner, you can see that there's a coat closet. There's no doors to it. It's fully exposed. And all that's really there is this industrial metal piping, very functional, as well as these sconces that you can see here. They're also this kind of chrome color, and they would have been prefabricated for a commercial setting. Gropius chooses them in this case for a residential setting, which was really novel for the time. Now, in the image on the right, we can see the staircase, which curves back on itself as it goes up to the second floor. There's more industrial piping here. The curved staircase is also a little bit of a nod to New England traditions. One of the only things that is specially made for this house is this black banister here on the inside of the staircase. And we can see that it has this wonderful kind of wormy property to it as it snakes its way up to the second floor. So that is custom. But most of the other things we'll see are mass produced and sort of integrated into a residential setting in a completely novel way. So imagine now Gropius has invited you over for dinner. This is what the dinner table is going to look like. It's a very intimate spot, right? There's only 4 seats here. And on one side, we have a plate glass window. So this uninterrupted view of the back gardens, of this wooden area at the back of the house, completely private, a wonderful connection to nature here. On the other side, more glass bricks, this kind of wonderful modulated light. And on the other side of those glass bricks would be Gropius's private study. So at the table, I just want to point out that the furniture here seems, pretty ordinary to us, seems fairly familiar to us, but these were prototypes of modern designs from the Bauhaus that Gropius brought with him from Germany. Nobody in America had really seen anything like this. So the furniture designer was Marcel Breuer. A lot of the furniture in the house was also designed by Breuer, including tables like this over here. So this was revolutionary for the time. There's also this kind of pinhole light embedded in the ceiling, which creates this cone of light just over the table and on the faces of the people there. So you get this wonderful sense of intimacy. Beyond that, more curtains separating the dining room from the living room beyond it. So imagine being able to kind of ensconce your guests in this wonderful space here and to really feel like every meal that you're having there is intimate and this warm, inviting space. Now, if we move beyond the dining room into the living room, you can just see the fireplace back here. There's a lot more of this modern furniture, including this wonderful chair here with the animal throw on top of it, bathed in light from another giant plate glass window. Now, I should mention that Gropius designed this house to take advantage of passive solar energy. So if you're anything like me, you're just like sweating in the summer and freezing in the winter. He was thinking of that back in 1938, and he positioned the house in such a way that this plate glass window would get all the light on a winter's day and basically none of the light in the heat in the summer. So taking advantage of really where the sun is in the sky. So very smart orientation right there. This piece of furniture, again, might not look very revolutionary to you. You can buy something very similar at IKEA for about $120 today, but this laminated bent plywood furniture was another Bauhaus prototype designed by Marcel Breuer. So really nobody in America had ever seen anything like it, and we all know it can be incredibly comfortable. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to is this library of books on the back wall there. Notice the brackets that are used to hang these bookshelves there. Now, Gropius did not design the brackets. They already existed, but he was really one of the first people to use it in a residential setting. Something like this would have always been used in commercial or retail settings. But what a smart thing and what an economical thing to integrate that into your home. We've got a little Bauhaus day bed here, but we're going to move upstairs into the primary bedroom. And you've really never seen a bedroom like this before. So Gropius essentially created this wall down the center of his bedroom nearly at the foot of his bed, where there's a door that actually has a door in it that shuts, and then this huge plexiglass window so you can see from the bed into the other half of the room. You can also draw the curtains if you want a little bit of privacy. And then you have Mrs. Gropius's dressing table here with a mirror integrated into that plexiglass. So why on earth would you put a wall down the center of your bedroom like this? Once again, it was a concern out of temperature and comfort. So the Gropiuses, like many other people at the time, slept with their windows open for the better part of the year. So even when it got really chilly outside, their bedroom windows were open. So that meant that they could close this door and keep the rest of the house really warm and toasty if they wanted to. And, you know, skip out here and run over to the bathroom just outside and not have to have a chilly bathroom to deal with. So it was really just a smart way to control the temperature in the house. I mentioned there are 3 bedrooms. I'm just going to show you one other bedroom, and that was the room that they designed for their 12-year-old daughter at the time. Now, she got the biggest room in the house, and Gropius had apparently asked his daughter, "What can I give you in this bedroom?" And she had asked for all sorts of fantastical things, as any 12-year-old would. Like, she wanted, you know, beach sand on the floor. She wanted to look at the stars when she fell asleep. And he couldn't deliver on all of these things, but he did his best. So in the picture over here, we can see a dressing table with more of this Breuer furniture here, corresponds to the same dressing table that we see in the image on the right. Another curtain embedded into the ceiling with a track right there. So when you're standing in his daughter's bedroom, her actual bed is just behind you in this scene. But this extra alcove here where you can draw the curtain has another bed, and it was really considered a reading nook. It was almost like a built-in fort into her bedroom, or an extra private space for her, which I think is so wonderful. Over here, just above her desk, which once again Gropius designed for himself. This was his desk at the Bauhaus. You can see there's these vertical slats on the wall, and they are the same height as the ribbon of windows on this wall. So it's almost a way to extend the visuals of that window onto this wall, and a really smart way to hang art on this wall without affecting the walls itself, without putting any holes there. Now, his daughter had asked to be able to see the stars while she slept. He couldn't deliver on that, but he did give her her very own terrace. So out this door, you get out here to this gorgeous terrace setting. This is right above the living room, so you get all this wonderful light in the summer. This is actually Mrs. Gropius lounging there. And you can see in the image on the right that this wall here is painted pink. Unlike every other surface of this house, which is black and white, this was just to reduce the glare. And way over here on the right, you can see the opening here that goes to that spiral staircase at the front of the house. So he even gave his daughter her own private entrance, the ability to go in and out of the house as she pleased. So much freedom for a young person, and who wouldn't just eat that right up? Now, apparently, Helen Storrow also gave a plot of land, about 4 acres, to that same furniture designer who created all of these pieces at the Gropius house. His name was Marcel Breuer, and his house, which is also in the Bauhaus style, is right next door to the Gropiuses. And believe it or not, a number of other modernist properties, a lot of mid-century modernism actually, sprung up in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And to this day, there is still FOMA, F-O-M-A, the Friends of Modern Architecture in Lincoln, Massachusetts. They do events and tours and really sort of bring together all these lovers of modernist architecture. If you're dying to see the rest of the Gropius house, it is owned by the organization Historic New England and open seasonally for tours. So you can go right online to Historic New England's website and get a fantastic tour of this property. Even though you might find some of the elements there sort of off-putting, I always find his decisions to be really sort of brilliant. In fact, his house was published in the New York Times just after he built it, and about 1,000 people went through the house in the year following that. All these curious people who had to stop in and take a look. And apparently one older woman said to Mrs. Gropius, "Isn't it just exhausting to always live ahead of your time?" And Mrs. Gropius just found that so funny, because this was a house that just worked for them. And I think that there's a lot of smart solutions there. All right, so Gropius was highly celebrated during his lifetime, even if the neighbors didn't necessarily like the house. So let's turn our attention to another highly celebrated architect, Philip Johnson. And once again, we have these sort of bookend pictures of him from his career. His New York Times obituary characterized him as both the elder statesman of architecture and also the enfant terrible. He was born in Cleveland and he attended Harvard. He was actually one of Walter Gropius's students. And he went on and found success in the field very early on. Before the age of 30, he had published a seminal text on the international style. So as an architect, he really made a name for himself by focusing on the aesthetic elements of architecture. And I think we'll really see that in the work that we'll look at tonight. Okay. So we probably best know Philip Johnson through his most notable work of architecture that's probably closest to many of us today. It's right in downtown Boston at the main branch of the Boston Public Library. This is the original McKim building on Copley Square. Just behind it, here it is again, is the Philip Johnson addition, which I think in many ways is really smart because it matches that original building in scale and in color. It was just recently redone to rave reviews, redone inside, I should say. There's a great deal of vitality there now. Now, just behind it, you can see the Hancock Tower, designed by I.M. Pei, who was another student of Walter Gropius's and a fellow student to Philip Johnson at Harvard. So a small little world of architecture here in Boston. But tonight, I wanted to introduce you to The Glass House, designed by Philip Johnson in 1949. This house is in New Canaan, Connecticut, and it was designed for Philip Johnson. He said he was his own best client. So the Glass House eventually becomes this sprawling complex. He buys up all the land around it. I think it totals something close to 50 acres, and he ends up building 14 different buildings on this complex, knowing that eventually he would donate it all to the historic trust, and that it would eventually be open for tours after he passed away. So let's get a little bit closer to the Glass House here. Johnson was quoted as saying that his idea for this house grew from his experience seeing during World War II, a burnt wooden village where nothing was left but the foundations and chimneys of brick. So we have this kind of purified essence of architecture with the Glass House. And so it is an all steel structure. Every single wall, door, and window is made out of glass. It's just over 1,800 square feet. And if we look at the plan here, we've got our kitchen, we've got our dining room, our living room, our bathroom, our bedroom, and even a study. So it really has everything you could possibly need. Let's go inside and see how this all works. So this is the living room. Actually, I'm going to zoom in for a slightly better view of the living room here. Now, what makes the Glass House spectacular, of course, is its connection to nature. In a glass house, all of the views of the landscape are technically it's wallpaper. Philip Johnson joked that he had very expensive wallpaper. All of the furniture here was designed by an architect named Mies van der Rohe, and Mies van der Rohe essentially designed his own glass house, and he did it before Philip Johnson, but Philip Johnson finished his before van der Rohe's Farnsworth house. So somehow he gets all the credit. Now, when you're inside Johnson's Glass House, you can see that it's an experience of looking out and framing these beautiful views, feeling fully integrated into this landscape. So it's a house that presents us this duality of being both inside and outside, being a part of nature and yet apart from it. This is a house that aims at becoming invisible. What a wild idea, right? So we're going to turn our attention now from this living space and look over here to the dining room. So just looking past the living room, here's our dining room table. There's this big, beautiful sculpture over here that is a permanent part of the Glass House. We can see an open door in the background as well. So here is the dining room area. Once again, this kind of sleek, streamlined, international style furniture. Now, if you're anything like me, in your dining room, you might have a favorite seat, a seat that's oriented in such a way that there's never, a door behind you, or you have, the best view in the room. And I think in this space, you'd want to kind of rotate through these chairs, because as the seasons change, as the light of the changes throughout the day, the view at each one of these seats would just be spectacular. And you might be thinking, okay, so I could imagine myself sitting at this dining room table. What are the facilities for actually cooking a meal in this tiny little house? Well, there is a kitchen. It's a pretty simple kitchen. We can see there's a tiny little sink over here, an even smaller stove. And Johnson was so concerned about having a sleek, sort of streamlined aesthetic to this house that you can fold over the countertop on top of those utilitarian functions so that they don't create any visual disruption. On this L-shaped counter here, you shouldn't even put any mail. Like, right, this is a surface that you want to keep clean the entire time. Now we're just going to swing back around and take a look at this living room from this perspective. You can see that there's this giant cylindrical fireplace here. It's a little bit funny to me that that there is this emphasis on fire here, because it's almost an antiquated notion, right? This idea of gathering around a fireplace. It's very 19th century, but who doesn't love a big roaring fire? This cylinder has a very important function because it provides really the only privacy in this whole house. You might be thinking, where do you go to the bathroom? It's on the other side of this cylinder. There is a door into this tiny little bathroom. You can see that there is a convex wall here bowing out the back of the fireplace. And you have the simplest little round shower here, a sink, and a commode, but it's all elegant and beautiful at the same time. So where do you sleep at the glass house? There's just a little bit of privacy here as well, behind a bank of closets here, a simple bed, and there's that study, the desk in the distance. So imagine waking up with the first light of day. There are no curtains at the glass house. And imagine, anybody who might be walking by could see you waking up with the first light of day. So maybe, you might be thinking, did Philip Johnson have many guests at this place? Where would they even stay? Well, Philip Johnson had that covered, believe it or not. Just diagonally from the glass house, here's that kitchen side of the glass house. He built a guest house, and you can see it is roughly the same proportions of the glass house, but it is in material the exact opposite. It looks like an almost solid building, solid brick, to provide as much privacy as possible. If we look at it from another perspective, here's the glass house. Notice that they added a few shades over time, but that guest house does have these three round portals in the back, allowing in just a little bit of light. We can see Philip Johnson here sitting inside the guest house at one of those windows. So there's an opportunity for your guests to stay there. Well, Philip Johnson and his partner, David Whitney, were avid art collectors. Where do you hang your art if your walls are all glass? Philip Johnson came up with a solution to that. He created an art gallery that is essentially an underground bunker. This painting gallery was constructed in 1968. It's just one of the various buildings on the property. I think it's a really incredible, innovative design. Here's the plan. You walk through this door right here, through a long hallway, and into this space that is essentially composed of these 4 circles. And 3 of these circles contain these carpeted walls, and you can sort of flip through these walls almost as though you're looking at posters in a store. And so if you want to see a new painting here, you just move this wall around the circular track, and then you have 2 new paintings to look at. I think it's just a brilliant way to hang art, especially for your personal enjoyment. And so it also protects this art from sunlight and from any other kind of attack you could possibly imagine. So as we wrap up with the glass house, I want to show you one of the last buildings that Philip Johnson designed on the property. He called it Damonsta. It was designed in 1995. We can see a real influence from architects like Frank Gehry with this kind of curving surface here. This was made out of modified gunite, and the interior does not correspond to any sort of rectilinear interior shape we've ever seen before. I know it's a little bit hard to understand in this picture, but this corner here meets and bows out. The ceiling sort of comes down to meet that corner. When you step into Damonsta in real life, it makes you physically ill. I stepped in there for about maybe 30 seconds and had to kind of run outside. It's a very disorienting space. Philip Johnson originally conceived of Damonsta as being the visitor services portal for visiting this property after he passed away. But ultimately, they built a visitor services space across the street from the train station in downtown New Canaan, Connecticut. So if you want to go see the glass house and all of these other buildings on the property, that's where you would get started. And they bring you by bus over to the glass house, and you would get to still peek inside Damonsta. So as we wrap up on the glass house, I've got these 2 images here of who else but Andy Warhol hanging around at the glass house. You can see Philip Johnson in the background. And Andy Warhol, I think, is sort of important to understanding the legacy of the glass house, because there is something truly fascinating about this idea of being able to peek in at somebody as they live their life, just the banal existence of everyday life. Actually, when Philip Johnson lived in this house, he had huge security problems. People were always trespassing to try and look at him. So he didn't live there very long. Eventually, it became a weekend house, and then just a place where he held parties. He had to hire security at a certain point to just keep onlookers away. So if you think about this, the glass house was almost like a precursor to reality television or people oversharing their lives on social media. You can imagine that Andy Warhol would look at the concept of the glass house and think, this is like living in a television. You're stepping into this glass box so that the world can watch your life unfold. So of course, Andy Warhol loved it. Now, the glass house made Philip Johnson famous. And it's a structure that still prompts us to consider some of the most fundamental questions about architecture and how we live. Why do we need a solid wall in certain parts of our house? And do we really? And for anybody who's wondering, yes, it was absolutely, it was like a nightmare in terms of how hot it got in there in the summer. We had Gropius, who was so concerned about temperatures, but let me tell you, living in a glass house in the summer, it got pretty toasty. All right, so the last house we're going to look at was designed by none other than Frank Lloyd Wright. He's the oldest of our architects, but this is the latest house we're going to be looking at, just designed a year after the glass house. And Frank Lloyd Wright is really considered America's most favorite architect. He's probably the only architect that most Americans know. He had a long career. He was continually creative. He not only did he design buildings, but he designed furniture, he designed landscapes, he wrote books, he taught architecture, and every so often, if he had a really good client, he would even design clothes for them to wear that sort of matched or corresponded to the houses that he designed for them. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright is best known for Falling Water, this heroic structure designed for a property in southwestern Pennsylvania. It sits right on top of this waterfall, and it has these kind of modern cantilevers springing out from what almost seems like this natural rock outcropping here. So it's the blending of the natural and the modern here to really kind of integrate and present something novel in this gorgeous setting. That was designed in 1935. It was essentially a mansion for a very rich man, but it was the Depression, and Frank Lloyd Wright also had to come up with other ways to pay the bills. So the following year, he innovated a new house type that he called the Usonian, and this is his very first Usonian house over here on the right. It's called the Jacobs House in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a house that was supposed to be within the financial reach of the middle class America. It was a small house. All of the furniture would be integrated and included into the cost of the house. And it was a house designed for privacy from the road and maximum enjoyment of your backyard, your private space. So there's a lot to be learned from that first house, but we are going to just turn our attention now to the example of a Usonian house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright that's here in New England in Manchester, New Hampshire. This is the Zimmerman House. It was designed in 1950, built by 1952. And the house that we're looking at is 2 beds, 2 baths, and about 1,800 square feet. So the same square footage as the glass house. It cost the Zimmermans about $60,000 back in the 1960s, which at the time was roughly 3 times the cost of the average house in Manchester. And in today's money, it would be well over $500,000, which actually still seems cheap for a Frank Lloyd Wright designed house. Now, Wright never came to this property. He didn't oversee the building of it. He simply designed it. And as much as the Zimmermans wanted him to come and visit, he never did. He never set foot in New Hampshire, as far as we know. And he placated his clients by saying, "Oh, Mrs. Zimmerman, I know your house from A to Z," which is a nice little play on her name. Now, suffice it to say, the mill town of Manchester, New Hampshire had never seen anything like this before. And apparently a chicken coop is like the way to disparage modern architecture, because that's what the neighbors called this house too. So it is a gorgeously preserved example of Wright's work. It's owned and operated by the Currier Museum of Art. The Zimmermans bequeathed the house to the Currier upon their death. So it's been just lovingly preserved since the late 1980s. So let me give you a sense in terms of the aerial view here, how the house is positioned on this lot. It's a roughly 1 acre lot of land, roughly a rectangle. And instead of orienting the house towards the street that it's located on, Wright divides the property diagonally, once again, taking advantage of passive solar energy and providing a completely private triangular backyard here. You'll notice that there's a very large sort of carport area in the front, and that's where we're going to head to now. Imagine being the Zimmermans, or imagine you're moving into this house. And I'm sorry that the image here is a little bit distorted. This is such a long, low house. It's very difficult to photograph. But what we're heading towards right now, you're driving home, we are heading towards the Zimmerman's carport. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright did not invent the carport, but he did come up with that term. That is his term. He hated the idea of garages. He thought, horses have stables, cars do not need stables. You don't need a garage. He thought everything you put in your garage, you don't really need. So the Usonian house doesn't have a garage, an attic, or a basement. All that stuff is unnecessary, according to Frank Lloyd Wright. But he did love a good car, so he's willing to give you a carport. So imagine you're the Zimmermans, you drive home at the end of the day. Frank Lloyd Wright has sliced open this carport at the back so that you can peek into your backyard as you pull up into your carport. And you have this wonderful, almost cinematic view of nature. And it makes you sort of slow down. It makes you breathe a little bit easier. It sets the stage for relaxation when you're home. So you get out of your car, you're in your carport, you're not looking at any junk, you're looking at this gorgeously framed view of nature. Now, then you'd head to your front door. Frank Lloyd Wright famously loved to hide his front doors, but in this case, he accents it with this big granite boulder. It's sort of, the house kind of pivots around it. And it's part of the site that Frank Lloyd Wright was very familiar with, the site plan. So he knew he wanted to highlight some of the natural features of the property. It's not falling water, but it is a great example of Frank Lloyd Wright's approach to architecture. Now, the exterior of this building, you can see, is incredibly private. We have this row of very high windows. Here, they're stamped concrete block windows. We can't see anything inside the house from this view. We have no idea of what the interior looks like. So we head in through these front doors and we go to what Frank Lloyd Wright called the garden room. And this is really your living room. There's a lot going on here. So first and foremost, I just want to frame this as, this is Frank Lloyd Wright's view of organic architecture. This is a great example of it because there's, first of all, well, there's colors that reflect the natural world, a beautiful autumnal color palette that you can see, I think, especially well in the textiles that were selected for this house. Beyond that, the materials of the ceiling, the brick here as well, are really kind of these outstanding natural materials. Frank Lloyd Wright chose upland Georgia cypress for the wood on the ceiling of this house, and it's exquisite. You don't paint the wood here, you let its natural beauty sing. To the same extent, every single brick milled for this house is perfect. Now the floor here is in the same kind of autumnal color palette. It's what a color that Frank Lloyd Wright referred to as Cherokee red. And I know it's hard to see in this image, but you can just see that there are some lines in it. There is a grid scored into this concrete floor here. And it's squares. It's a grid of squares, and they're roughly 4 feet by 4 feet wide. So that's another component of organic architecture for Frank Lloyd Wright. This notion that this 4 foot by 4 foot grid would kind of emerge from the floor, extend throughout the house, and sort of be reduced down to smaller components too in an organic fashion. So you'll notice over here on this very long bench, it's like 30 feet long. You have these huge back cushions to this bench. They almost look a little uncomfortable, right? But they are roughly 4 feet by 4 feet long. Apparently Mrs. Zimmerman loved to come home and lie down on this bench. So we have this great kind of mathematical relationship between elements of the house, but just above those cushions are 2 foot by 2 foot concrete block windows, and inside them are roughly 1 foot by 1 foot panes of glass. So that's that organic element to this building. All of these kind of mathematically related components to the house that just make sense putting them together that way. So imagine you're the Zimmermans, you come home, maybe you're enjoying a little bit of music. We can see that they were musicians, but you sit down on this long bench here and you're oriented towards this side of the house that faces the back of the property. And there are these huge brick piers, but what's in between them? Well, it's a gorgeously framed view of the backyard. Backyard doesn't look especially great in this photograph, but we can see that he's using a roughly 4 foot by 4 foot window to frame the backyard. Just like in the glass house where you don't hang art on a glass wall or on art itself. In this case, the art is the view. And so Frank Lloyd Wright makes that really explicit. He also blends this distinction between the indoors and the outdoors. I would say he brings the outdoors in. So you can see that he has blended that distinction by putting planters inside the house, but also just outside the house. The glass goes right into those planters, so it's hard to see where the indoors and the outdoors begin and end. He also blends that glass right into the ceiling. And so that beautiful Georgian cypress continues on from the inside to the outside. You're not really sure where the house begins and ends. And then finally, we have this really innovative lighting scheme that he's developed here, where inside these louvers are electric light bulbs. So that's sort of like a glaring view of it, but it's a very subtle thing that he does to create this illusion of sunlight filtering down through the trees and sort of dappling everything underneath. So these brick piers almost begin to function like tree trunks, and the ceiling in some ways sort of dissolves into the tree line. And so we have this experience of being outdoors and inside at the same time. Now, if we look back through the garden room here, this is that long banquette. Again, this is actually the front door back here. We can see that there's this massive fireplace, sort of like the glass house, but in this case, it is rectilinear. And this is Frank Lloyd Wright showing off. It's sort of like an architect's joke, because we have this huge mass of bricks. But how is it supported? It's just kind of levitating here. It projects out from the wall and it's just hanging there. Well, there is some steel in this building, but normally, going back to the very fundamentals of architecture, you would have like a post and beam structure to support all of this heavy weight. Not only is there no post here to support the lintel, but Frank Lloyd Wright even breaks the lintel, accentuating the fact that there's no physical support for all of this weight here. So if you trust that these bricks are going to stay up in the air, you can sit right there by the fireplace like Mrs. Zimmerman did in this photograph here. And the Zimmermans sort of gathered around the fireplace with that same almost 19th century notion of family life that Frank Lloyd Wright embraced for so many of his properties. Now, the shelves up above Mrs. Zimmerman here sort of wrap around this corner, and they're going to bring us in to this next significant space. This is what Frank Lloyd Wright called the dining loggia. And it really is just an open air walkthrough. It's a hallway, but this is your dining room too. So just to get you oriented, this is the dining room table over here in this image on the left. And on the right, it's that same table. It has a tablecloth on it, but that's that same edge. So you can see that there's just a little bit of clearance here, and then all of these doors that open up, there's screens on the inside, so you can sit and listen to the birds and smell the fresh air for as many months of the year as you desire. This is a close connection to nature here. And Wright knew he was designing this house for a professional couple that didn't have children, so they don't really need a big dining room. Think about your own dining room for a second. How often do you use it? If you're anything like me, you just kind of toss your mail on it and you forget about it until there's a big family gathering. So what about those big family gatherings or a big gathering in general? Well, Wright did something really brilliant for the Zimmermans. He designed all of the furniture inside the house, and he used essentially more mathematical equations to make everything the same height. So it was really flexible furniture. All of the seats are roughly 13 inches off the ground. All of the tables are roughly double that. In fact, all of the shelves are roughly 13 inches from each other too. So if you were going to have a big party, you could take this dining room table that you see has these notches in it here, a dining room table that seems just perfectly suited for two. You could take it and bring it back into the garden room. You'll notice that this hexagonal table here has a split down the middle. You pull it apart, the dining room table fits perfectly in between it. And then you could pull up all of these ottomans and have all of these people on the bench seating and easily have 12 people over for dinner. It's such a smart and flexible way to make this, modestly sized house really work. So I wanted to quickly share with you the Zimmerman's kitchen. It's what Frank Lloyd Wright called the workspace, because you also have your laundry in this sort of narrow galley kitchen here with the clerestory windows. And we can see that it's a very functional space as well. A lot of open shelving that's so popular again. But what's great about this is by making, the laundry and everything on this level here, Frank Lloyd Wright designed them a house that they could grow old in. There isn't a single step in this house. And the Zimmermans really did live here and live here comfortably until their very last days. And I think that there's something wonderful and remarkable in that. So a quick peek at the primary bedroom, and then we'll be heading on. Whenever I give tours of the Zimmerman house, people would inevitably be so disappointed by their bedroom because there was really nothing magnificent about it in terms of the scale. Once again, very modest. The Zimmermans actually slept on just a full-size bed through the rest of their lives and kept the same bedspread for the next 30 years because it matched the textiles in the house. Notice that above them, though, was more of that beautiful upland Georgia cypress and the windows that blended seamlessly into it. So it blurred that distinction between the indoors and the outdoors. Here's the edge of that same bed over here. Now, apparently, Frank Lloyd Wright had this notion that, well, I should mention that the Zimmermans slept with their windows open, just like the Gropiuses, but they had to apparently beg Frank Lloyd Wright for a few windows. They did want, or I'm sorry, for a few curtains. They wanted more privacy than, say, the glass house. So if we look at the Zimmerman house from behind in the twilight like this, it's all lit up. It's like a lantern, right? And we can see that it's almost a blend of Philip Johnson's glass house and his brick house, his guest house, because the back is all glass and it's oriented towards that private backyard. In so many ways, it reminds me of like a modern day vacation house. It's oriented towards the nicest view, and it allows for the maximum connection to and enjoyment of that gorgeous view. So in terms of the Zimmerman house's legacy, well, there's another Frank Lloyd Wright house built just down the street, 4 houses away, by one of Dr. Zimmerman's colleagues. This is what's called a Usonian automatic. This is the Khalil house. It was recently acquired by the Currier Museum of Art, so you get 2 for 1 Frank Lloyd Wright houses when you go to visit. And there's no other museum in the world that owns 2 Wright houses open to the public, so take advantage of that. But beyond this really innovative design, I would just say that a modest ranch-style house with a carport is an idea that has proliferated throughout New England. And I will tell you that I am coming to you tonight from a house that looks remarkably similar to the house over here on the right. So Frank Lloyd Wright's ideas have certainly proliferated, but the incredibly modern aspects of them maybe have not, maybe haven't trickled down in the same way. So let's shift gears now. And very quickly, we're just going to be looking at these 2 libraries to wrap things up tonight. Our first architect that we're going to consider is Louis Kahn. Once again, sort of images of him from the bookends of his career. He was born into a Jewish family in the Russian Empire, what is now Estonia. He and his family emigrated to the United States when he was just 6 years old. He founded his own architecture firm in his 30s and then eventually taught architecture at UPenn and Yale. He was a highly decorated architect, just like all of the architects that we've seen so far. And he's probably best known for his monumental and monolithic buildings. There's this kind of majesty to the simple geometries. that he uses. And his heavy buildings, like the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, these kind of heavy buildings that don't hide their materials. This is probably what he's best known for. This building that we're looking at is in San Diego, California. So it's got this gorgeous view over the ocean. And you might be thinking, wow, I guess he didn't really like windows. Well, the other less romantic view of the Salk Institute is in this direction. You can see that he built in a lot of glass so that there were all these wonderful views looking out over the ocean. So, so he designed this building in 1965 in right around the same time in Exeter, New Hampshire. The Phillips Exeter Academy was thinking about designing a new library, and the headmaster of the school said he wanted to hire the very best contemporary architect in the world to design the library. And who else but Jonas Salk actually got in touch with them. His son attended the academy, and he said, work with Louis Kahn, he's the best. So that's what the academy ended up doing. If you've never been to the school, it's dominated by this kind of Georgian revival architecture like we see over here on the left. And Louis Kahn gives a little bit of a nod to it by using some brick, but everything else about his design is so revolutionary. This is the facade of the library that he designed. It was finished in 1972 at a cost of just under $4 million at the time. It would be roughly $27 million in today's money. And so, with this view here, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we can see all of these openings, all of these doors at the bottom of the building. And I should mention that this is a building that's roughly a cube, and every facade of the building looks exactly like this. So from every direction, it looks like you can access the building. And we can also see this kind of heavy brick masonry. There is no steel in the exterior of this building. So the bricks are doing all of the work. And this is like 9 stories of brick. Notice how the piers are very wide down here, and they get ever more slender as you go up here to the top. And then we have like this open air story here. So Louis Kahn designed it I think he said something to the effect of like, at the bottom, the bricks are groaning, and at the top, they're sort of dancing. And it's remarkable to me because it's not even something that I noticed when I look at this building. It doesn't seem as though these are piers that are tapering in any ways. It all seems really balanced, but it gets, the glass gets bigger as you go up. So if we look a little bit closer at the facade of the building, the bricks were milled locally, and they're kind of rough hewn bricks. They are in no way those kind of pristine bricks that Wright had designated for the Zimmerman House just a couple of decades earlier. We can also see that there is some teak on the exterior of the building as well. Now, when we go inside, there are actually just these 2 round staircases clad in travertine that lead us up to the main level of the building. And on that main level, there is this giant open atrium. And it seems in some ways fairly simplistic, like a circle in a square here. Now, beyond just those basic geometries, we have these associations with these bigger ideas. We have the associations with the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, who was writing about how these basic geometries are essentially divine proportions, that they're related to human anatomy. This is, of course, Da Vinci's drawing of the Vitruvian Man here. So, and beyond the Vitruvian connections, you also have this notion that the proportions in terms of the height and the width of this rectangle that the circle is embedded in, this is, it's the golden ratio here. So it's going back to the ancient Greeks in terms of what makes for sort of the best, the most satisfying proportions in architecture. So all of these things might be lost on us, but we appreciate them on some sort of unconscious level. When you're standing inside the atrium of this library, levitating up above you is this massive concrete X. And it does serve some structural purpose, but it doesn't need to be quite this big. It's just something that Louis Kahn did to give us this sense of awe when you're in this space. All of his buildings have been called temples before. This is a temple for learning. And this is an element that imbues a sense of wonder while you're there. Now, if we look at the plan for this building, we've looked at the atrium. Outside of that is like an outer ring of the stacks. He always called this building like buildings within buildings here. So we've got our open atrium, we've got the stacks enclosing it, and then there is that brick wall, the facade that goes all the way around. And there are study carrels built into that wall, to that brick wall. So I want to show you those study carrels just for a moment here. This is where all the light is. And Louis Kahn said the essential function of a library is to find a book. Imagine you're in the stacks over here. You find a book and you bring it towards the light. So he prioritizes that for the students by building roughly 200 study carrels right into the exterior wall of the building here. Now, he also does something really smart in terms of the organization of the space, because Exeter had a building code at the time that said that you couldn't design any building that was over 4 stories tall. This is a 9-story tall building, but he skirted the building codes by just putting a mezzanine level on every floor of the building. So you have like 1 M1, 2 M2. And he got around it. And the end result is that he has built the largest secondary school library in the world. He has won so many awards for this building. Even posthumously, he won the American Institute of Arts 25-year award that recognizes enduring significance to one building per year. And he was a very modest man. Whenever this building was brought up, he said, "I just put a roof over it." So that is like really the ultimate understatement here. So we'll finish up very quickly with Maya Lin in our last few moments. She is a designer, a sculptor, a landscape architect, and of course won international recognition when she won the blind design competition to design the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. She was just an undergraduate at Yale at the time. So we can see her here as a young person, over here present day. And of course, that design for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is really unlike any memorial that existed in America prior to it. It's these highly polished black granite panels that contain the names of the more than 58,000 men and women who perished in that war. And it is an incredible place for reflection and mourning. Every time I look at these images, I'm just moved. Maya Lin has created something that is now one of America's favorite pieces of architecture. But of course, it was something that was incredibly controversial at the time, in part because of her own identity as a Chinese American. So in the years since, she's created a number of really remarkable monuments. She doesn't really do monuments anymore. In recent years, she was invited to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, to reimagine their original library building. This is a Carnegie Library called the Nielsen Library, designed in 1909. Over the course of the 20th century, a number of wings were added to it, and it was sort of clogging up the campus, made it a little bit more congested, and then also just created these dark labyrinths, like these warrens of spaces in the library itself that just didn't really work for the campus. So one critic referred to the old library wings as the architectural equivalent of throwing a beige trench coat over an evening dress. So she had, Maya Lin had this profound connection to Smith College because her own mother, who was fleeing communist China, left the country with just $10 and her Smith College acceptance letter sewn into her clothes. And so Smith College saved her mother's life, essentially. And Maya Lin thought, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Smith College. So she understands the importance of memory, the importance of place. That being said, she took this building down to the studs. The expansions were completely destroyed and removed, but she understood that the building itself had these important, it played an important role in terms of people's memories. So she preserved that original Carnegie Library. And the end result is this. Here's the reimagined library that is all new inside, with these new wings that take up a smaller footprint on the Frederick Law Olmsted Design Campus. Just a quick note to say that as architecture critics talk about this building, it's really interesting to hear how gendered the terms are. I read something that said that these wings are swaddled in limestone, which I think is a very unusual way to talk about architecture, and that these wings were also jewel boxes. Now, they're not even box shapes, and there's nothing jewel toned about them. So once again, I question where a lot of the language about this building comes from. Now, this was a $120 million project, and we can see when we look inside, we're just going to skip past this where we can just see the materials old and new. But when we head inside, we can see that there is a lot of open space here. This building gave the campus room to breathe, and designed in the midst of the coronavirus, it gave the students room to breathe too. There's a lot of flexible space here for collaboration and for presentations. And right at the center of that original building, there is this huge roof to basement light well here with this white wall that essentially channels all of that light downwards. Maya Lin referred to it as being a 74-foot tall sundial. This is the basement level here, so you can still see that it's kind of flooded with light. You might be thinking, okay, so where are all of the books? There are these compactable stacks in addition to shelves or throughout the building, but the compactable stacks are now in the basement. It's just sort of a smarter way to house their book collection. If we turn our attention to the jewel boxes, to that expansion here, when you head inside, you have this big open atrium. It is not as monumental as Louis Kahn's library. Instead, I would say it's designed to be kind of fun looking, warm, welcoming. The furniture was selected to be bright, cozy, functional, accessible. And it's not just about study carrels anymore. It's providing accessible furniture close to the light again. In fact, it got me thinking about study carrels and Louis Kahn and sort of prioritizing the light that way. And I did find this view of some study carrels at Maya Lin's library. And I noted that they're sort of set back from the light in this case, because she's mindful of the fact that anybody sitting at one of those desks has a computer that's providing its own light. So just outside of these floor to ceiling glass windows here, we can see a sunken garden, and that was dedicated to her mother's memory. In fact, the landscape all around this building has been reimagined. So here's that same sunken garden on the left. And on the other side of the building is a built-in amphitheater for outdoor gatherings for the college. So there's a lot about this building that is it's again providing that room to breathe and this new kind of functionality to the building itself. So here's another sort of glamour shot of the Nielsen Library here. It opened in March 2021, just about a year into the pandemic. And stories about the library were sort of overshadowed by the coronavirus, its impact on Smith College, its students, and the fact that Maya Lin's husband had passed away about 6 months earlier, very suddenly and tragically from a heart attack. So it was sort of seen in some ways as another monument. It's like a bookend to Maya Lin's very auspicious beginnings with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But Maya Lin's story, of course, isn't over. She continues to be recognized for her accomplishments. She's won just as many awards, if not more so, than the other male architects that we've looked at tonight. So to wrap up very quickly, a couple of big ideas here. We've seen some buildings tonight that were designed to connect the homeowner to nature using a variety of materials and means. We've seen some buildings where architects maximize light and sometimes use it for dramatic effect. And we've also seen buildings that make use of unusual materials and forms. Modern architects in New England have not just broken the mold when it comes to the history of architecture, they've set the new standard for revolutionary approaches to design worldwide. So I will end there for now. Sorry for going a little bit late, and I'll start looking at the questions in the chat over here. See, and if anybody has any questions, now is a great time to add them. Please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat. Let me just make sure I'm following up on everything here. Questions about the recording. Thanks for asking for that. Oh, I love that a few people were sort of responding to the spaces as we went along. That would be my room. I love this. I love the storage. I love the bookshelves. That's fantastic. I love that you can feel that kind of personal connection to these spaces because that's how I feel too. Eileen, thanks for your kind words. Let's see here. Laura says, is the standing sculpture a maquette or a copy of the one in the New York State Theater, now Koch Theater in Lincoln Center? I believe it is just another version by the same artist. I think that is Ellie Nadelman, if I'm remembering correctly. So Laura's referring to the sculpture right here in the glass house. Laura, thanks for asking about that. Mishi says, did he actually live there in the glass house for any meaningful amount of time? Mishi, I don't have the exact timetable, but it doesn't seem like he spent that much time living there. I think it required like an austerity in terms of the way that you lived. And the fact that you had no privacy really was an issue for him too. So most oftentimes when I was reading into how it was used, apparently it just became a place where he hosted parties, and people kind of talk about how it turned into like this endless salon for artists and architects. So in terms of living there, I don't think it really worked that well. Mishi also says, does the glass house have heating, AC? Where are the utilities like water heater, washer, dryer, etc.? Is there a window in the bedroom? Thinking building codes. All good questions. I actually don't know where the heater is, or like things like the water heater. I don't know if some of it is also in this cylinder or if some of it is in this bank of closets here. That's a really good question. You're the first person to ask me that. But there's no basement, obviously. So it's somewhere, it's either in one of those two masses. And I'm not sure if it would really fit into modern building codes. That's a really good question, because I don't think that there are functioning windows. There's just 4 doors that you can open up here on the accesses of the house. So all very good practical questions. And I think like the practical elements of living there really just didn't work, right? It got too hot in the summer. It was probably way too cold in the winter too. So it's really more about the idea and the aesthetics when it comes to the glass house, isn't it? Laura, thanks for your kind words, and Grace, you too. I really appreciate that. And I hope everybody can get a chance to see these buildings. I think that the library in Exeter is fairly accessible, but I know that the library at Smith College, you need a key card to get into. So you might have to hop onto a tour of the campus if you wanted to see the inside. I think that just about covers it, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to add. Maria, thanks for adding that. Yes, next month we'll be looking at the work of George Tucker. And I have a wonderful volunteer that works with me. She helps to assemble a lot of the images that I use. And so she put together like, dozens of George Tucker paintings. And if you've never heard of him, don't feel bad. He's not as well known as a lot of the other artists that I've covered. But she sends me the images, and she said, he is my favorite out of everybody you've covered so far. She was like fascinated by his pictures. And I think you will be too if you've never heard of him. He, like, his images, they just mesmerize. So he was roughly like a realist artist working in the 20th century. So that should be a lot of fun. And I hope you can join us next month for that.
Thank you, Jane. I'm really looking forward to next month too. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This program was recorded, and the recording will be available within the next couple days. We'll send it out to anyone who registered through library calendars or on Eventbrite, or and we'll send it out to everyone who signed in through Zoom. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye.